Imagine this. A bright, talented Ukrainian journalist, Sasha, is on her daily assignment, covering the war for Fox News. Sasha, whose real name is Alexandra Kuvshinova, was not new to the tremors of conflict. Back in the throes of the Euromaidan revolution in Kyiv, in February 2014, she vanished. Later found serving at a media center, she narrowly escaped a deadly fire. Sasha's spirit was indomitable, resilient in the face of adversity. Fast forward 8 years, Sasha was then working as a field producer for Fox News, entrenched in a war that was tearing her country apart. Her dedication to the truth, her commitment to journalism was unyielding. It was during one of these assignments, in a perilous region near Horenka, Ukraine, that the unexpected happened. A sudden explosion. A mortar shell or artillery fire, suspected to be from Russian forces, hit the car she was traveling in. The details remain unclear, shrouded in the fog of war. What was clear, however, was the devastating outcome. Sasha, the bright, talented Ukrainian journalist, was no more. The decision to venture into such a hazardous area has prompted questions. Discussions have ensued about the risks that local producers face and the treatment of fixers in the industry. Yet, amidst these debates, Sasha's memory endures. She is remembered as a talented and determined woman, a passionate journalist who braved the battlefields to bring the truth to light. This incident brings to light the dangers that journalists face while covering wars and the risks they take to bring the truth to the world. Before we delve into the complexities of the war, let's take a closer look at Sasha's life before the conflict. Born and raised in Kyiv, Sasha was a bright student with a keen interest in current affairs. Her curiosity led her to pursue a degree in journalism from the Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv. Sasha's passion for journalism was not confined to the classroom. She was an active participant in student newspapers and radio stations, honing her skills and gaining practical experience. She had a knack for storytelling, for uncovering the truth, and a drive that was impossible to ignore. Her journey into the world of journalism was not without its challenges, yet she persevered. Sasha's first steps in the field took her to the corridors of local news agencies in Ukraine. She covered a range of stories from local politics to social issues, always with an eye for detail and a commitment to truth. Her work quickly gained recognition, opening doors to international assignments. Before the war in Ukraine, Sasha had already experienced the harsh realities of conflict journalism. She covered stories in conflict-ridden areas like the Middle East and Eastern Europe, always putting herself on the front lines to bring the truth to the world. These experiences shaped her, made her resilient, and prepared her for the challenges that lay ahead. Sasha's journey to becoming a war correspondent was filled with challenges and triumphs. Her dedication to her craft and her unyielding commitment to journalism set her apart. Little did she know, her path would lead her to become a symbol of courage and determination in the face of war. The war in Ukraine did not happen overnight. It was a series of events that led to the current situation. To fully comprehend the intensity and complexity of the ongoing conflict, we have to delve into the historical and political context that preceded it. Let's take a step back to the year 2014. A significant event that sparked the tension was Russia's annexation of Crimea. This region, an autonomous republic of Ukraine, was home to a majority of Russian-speaking citizens. Russia's claim was based on the notion of protecting Russian interests and the ethnic Russian population. However, this move was seen as a blatant violation of Ukraine's sovereignty by the international community. The annexation was followed by a controversial referendum not recognized by the majority of the global community, where the Crimean population supposedly voted in favor of joining Russia. Subsequently, the conflict spread to eastern Ukraine, specifically in the regions known as Donbass, comprising Donetsk and Luhansk. Pro-Russian separatists in these regions, allegedly supported by Russia, declared independence from Ukraine, triggering a conflict that rapidly escalated into a violent and protracted standoff. This standoff, often referred to as the war in Donbass, has resulted in a humanitarian crisis, with thousands of lives lost and millions displaced. This period also saw the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17, an incident that further amplified the international outrage against Russia. The flight was shot down over eastern Ukraine, and investigations pointed towards Russian-backed separatists as the perpetrators, although Russia has consistently denied any involvement. While the conflict in eastern Ukraine simmered, Russia continued to flex its military muscle. The world watched as Russia conducted military exercises on the Ukraine border, heightening the tension in the region. These military maneuvers, coupled with Russia's unwillingness to engage in meaningful peace talks, signaled an impending escalation. The international community's response was varied. sanctions were imposed on Russia by many Western countries, aiming to pressurize Russia into reversing its annexation of Crimea and to cease its support for the separatists. However, these sanctions, while damaging to the Russian economy, did little to change Russia's stance or actions on the ground. In the midst of all this, Ukraine found itself politically and geographically torn. The country was struggling to find its identity, caught between its historical ties with Russia and its aspiration to integrate more with the West, particularly the European Union. This struggle was further complicated by the ongoing conflict, making it a battlefield not just for territory, but also for influence and identity. This was the beginning of a conflict that would escalate into a full-blown war. The annexation of Crimea, the war in Donbass, and the international consequences set the stage for a conflict that would continue to evolve, bringing us to the situation we see today. Let's turn the clock back to a crucial moment in this ongoing conflict, the annexation of Crimea by Russia, which sparked a series of events that led us to the power struggle we witness today. The tension began with the ousting of Ukraine's pro-Russian president, Viktor Yanukovych, which was followed by a swift and calculated move by Russia to deploy troops in Crimea. This was a strategic move, as the region was not only home to a majority of Russian-speaking citizens, but also housed Russia's Black Sea Fleet. The world watched in shock as Russian forces took control of key infrastructure, government buildings, and military installations, essentially imposing a de facto Russian rule. The annexation was justified by a controversial referendum, where the Crimean population supposedly voted in favor of joining Russia. But this vote was widely condemned and not recognized by the international community, who saw it as a clear violation of Ukraine's sovereignty. The world reacted, but not with the force needed to stop Russia's actions. Sanctions were imposed, governments voiced their disapproval, but the annexation went ahead. For the people of Crimea, life changed overnight. They found themselves in a state of uncertainty, torn between their Ukrainian identity and the imposed Russian rule. The annexation affected every aspect of their lives, from their freedom of speech to their economic stability. The annexation of Crimea was not just a territorial dispute, it was a blatant display of power, a message to the world that Russia was willing to redraw international boundaries to protect its interests. This pivotal moment set the stage for the war in eastern Ukraine, a conflict that would escalate into a full-blown power struggle, pulling in nations from around the globe and leaving a lasting impact on the world order. As the war progressed, it became clear that this was not just a conflict between two countries. It was a power struggle. A struggle that extended beyond the borders of Ukraine and Russia, reaching into the international arena where nations and alliances chose sides, influenced outcomes, and played a role in shaping the narrative of this conflict. In the West, support for Ukraine was swift and decisive. Nations rallied together, providing military aid, financial support, and a unified voice of condemnation against Russia's actions. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, played a significant role in this. The alliance, originally formed as a bulwark against Soviet aggression during the Cold War, found itself once again standing against Russian expansionism. NATO's support, however, was not just about defending Ukraine. It was about asserting the values that the alliance was built on: democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. Meanwhile, Russia found itself increasingly isolated. Sanctions rained down from all corners of the globe, targeting key sectors of its economy, its political elite, and even its sporting events. These sanctions were not just punitive, they were tools of deterrence designed to make Russia reconsider its actions and to show that aggression would not go unanswered. The world watched as the ruble plummeted and Russia's economy teetered on the brink of collapse. Yet, the Kremlin remained defiant. It sought support from its traditional allies, like China and India, but even these relationships were tested by the conflict. While Russia's actions were not openly condemned, there was a noticeable cooling of relations, a subtle shift that highlighted Russia's growing international isolation. Simultaneously, international bodies like the United Nations found themselves at the heart of diplomatic efforts to end the conflict. Yet, these efforts were fraught with challenges. The Security Council, often the epicenter of major decisions, was paralyzed by Russia's veto power. Meanwhile, peace talks led by other nations struggled to gain traction as the fighting continued unabated. The involvement of these international actors has added layers of complexity to the conflict. It's not just about Ukraine and Russia anymore. It's about alliances and allegiances, about economic power and geopolitical influence. It's about the very rules that govern international behavior and the consequences when these rules are broken. This international involvement has further complicated the situation and has made finding a resolution even more challenging. Yet, it has also shown that the world is not indifferent to the events unfolding in Ukraine. Nations are taking a stand, alliances are being tested, and the international order is being questioned. This power struggle is far from over, and its outcome will shape the world in ways we can only begin to imagine. As the power struggle continued, the conflict took a dramatic turn with the war in Donbass. This conflict within a conflict was a turning point, taking the Ukraine-Russia war to an entirely new level. The war in Donbass was not just another battle, it was a symbol of the escalating tension and deepening divide between Ukraine and Russia. The world watched as the once peaceful region of Donbass turned into a battleground. The international community was quick to react, with many condemning the violence and calling for a peaceful resolution. But the war raged on, unaffected by the pleas for peace. The war in Donbass was marked by fierce fighting, strategic maneuvers, and a stark disregard for the sanctity of human life. Civilians were caught in the crossfire, their homes destroyed, and their lives upended. The human cost of the conflict was immense, and the world could not ignore the suffering of the people of Donbass. This war was not just a conflict between two nations, it was a battle for control, for influence, and for power. It was a war that would shape the future of Ukraine and Russia, and its impact would be felt far beyond its borders. The war in Donbass was a stark reminder of the consequences of power struggles and the devastating impact they can have on innocent lives. Yet, despite the escalating violence, the people of Donbass remained resilient, their spirit unbroken, their resolve unshaken. They stood firm in the face of adversity, their determination serving as a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. Their courage was a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure even the harshest of circumstances. As we move forward, it is essential to remember the war in Donbass as a pivotal moment in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. It was a time that tested the resolve of nations, strained international relations, and brought the human cost of war into sharp focus. The war in Donbass escalated the conflict and deepened the divide between Ukraine and Russia. It was a turning point, a moment that will forever be etched in the annals of history. As we continue to navigate this volatile situation, we must remember the lessons learned from the war in Donbass and strive to prevent such conflicts in the future. In war, the tide can turn unexpectedly. This was the case when Ukraine allegedly launched drone strikes on 2 Russian air bases. The turn of events sent shockwaves across the global stage, challenging long-held assumptions about the invulnerability of Russia's interior. It was a bold move, audacious and filled with risk. Yet, it was a move that posed a series of questions about Russia's military capabilities and the course of this war. The strikes were not just an attack on physical structures, but an attack on Russia's pride. The significance of these actions was not lost on anyone. For the first time in this conflict, Ukraine was pushing back, not just defending, but going on the offensive, deep into Russia's territory. It was a shift in the dynamics of the war, a turning tide that no one saw coming. As the dust settled, an uncomfortable reality began to emerge. Moscow's military capabilities, once regarded as robust and unassailable, were now under scrutiny. The strikes indicated that perhaps they weren't as effective as advertised. In the war of perception, this was a significant blow for Russia. The world watched as the mighty bear seemed to stumble, its aura of invincibility shattered. To add insult to injury, Russian state news agencies revealed that the air bases were photographed by a US-based satellite imaging company. The humiliation was palpable and served to further intensify the scrutiny. The world was now watching, waiting to see how Russia would respond to this unexpected turn of events. It wasn't just a matter of pride, but a matter of strategic importance. How could Russia protect its interior if it couldn't prevent drone strikes on its air bases? The question weighed heavy on the minds of strategists and analysts around the world. Would this lead to an escalation of the conflict, or would it force Russia to rethink its strategy? The situation was unfavorable for Russia. The degradation of its military power was becoming evident. Claims emerged that the majority of Russian missiles fired were intercepted by Ukraine's air defense systems. This incident, coupled with the drone strikes, painted a picture of a turning tide. The underdog was fighting back, and the world was watching. This incident has not only escalated the conflict, but has also put Russia under immense pressure on the international stage. It has led to a shift in the dynamics of the war, a shift that has seen Ukraine transition from a defensive to an offensive stance. This turning tide has changed the narrative, and the world waits with bated breath to see how this will impact the course of the war. This incident has further escalated the conflict and has put pressure on Russia on the international stage. As we navigate our way through this complex and volatile situation, it's crucial to remember that in war, the tide can turn unexpectedly. Today we've seen that tide turn. What remains to be seen is how this will shape the future of this war and the region as a whole. Let's take a moment to understand the role of NATO in this conflict. As an international alliance built on the principle of collective defense, NATO has been closely monitoring the situation in Ukraine. While Ukraine is not a NATO member, the alliance has been vocal about its support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. NATO has condemned Russia's actions and called for an immediate end to the aggression. But it's not just words. NATO has also provided practical support to Ukraine in the form of training, advice, and assistance. This has included help in reforming Ukraine's defense and security sectors and strengthening its ability to defend itself. NATO's involvement has been crucial in Ukraine's defense against Russia. Behind the political and military strategies, there is a human cost that is often overlooked. Indeed, the human cost of war is as real as the destruction of buildings and the smoke-filled skies. It's the lives shattered, the homes destroyed, the dreams dashed. It's the displacement of people and the loss of everything familiar. It's the children who grow up too fast, their innocence stolen by the harsh realities of conflict. In the midst of this war in Ukraine, millions have been forced to leave their homes, their communities, their lives behind. They've had to find shelter wherever they can, often in overcrowded conditions without adequate food or health care. They've had to watch as their cities and towns, once filled with life, have been reduced to rubble and ruins. The war has also claimed countless lives. Men, women, and even children have found themselves in the line of fire. One such life lost was that of a bright, talented Ukrainian journalist named Sasha, who was merely doing her job, helping to cover the war for Fox News, when an explosion took her life. Her story is a stark reminder of the everyday heroes who risk their lives to bring us the news, the truth of what's happening on the ground. Infrastructure, too, has been a casualty of the war. Bridges, roads, hospitals, schools, these vital lifelines of a society have been damaged or destroyed, making daily life an even greater struggle for those who remain. The war has not only brought physical destruction, but it has also disrupted the social fabric and the sense of security that people once had. And then there are the psychological scars. The trauma of war doesn't end when the fighting stops. It continues to haunt those who have lived through it, casting a long shadow over their lives. The sound of an explosion, the sight of a military uniform, can trigger memories of fear and loss. The mental health impact of the war is a crisis in itself, adding another layer to the human cost of the conflict. But amidst the devastation, there is also resilience. There are stories of people helping each other, of communities coming together to rebuild. There are stories of people clinging to hope, to the belief that peace will come, that their homeland will heal. These stories, too, are part of the human cost of war. They are a testament to the strength of the human spirit, to our capacity to endure, to rebuild, to dream again. The human cost of the war is a reminder of the urgent need for a resolution. The lives disrupted, the homes destroyed, the dreams dashed, they all underscore the urgency of finding a way to end the conflict and restore peace. Because the true cost of war is not just measured in military victories or political gains, but in the lives that are forever changed, the futures that are forever altered. The war in Ukraine is a complex issue with many layers. At its core, it's a struggle for power and sovereignty, a battle that dates back to historical rifts and nationalistic sentiments. As we've seen, the unexpected explosion that marked the onset of this conflict was just the first in a series of escalating events, each one more devastating than the last. The unfolding of the war wasn't just a series of battles and confrontations. It was also a story of international involvement, of nations drawn into the conflict, taking sides, and wielding influence. The world watched as Russia and Ukraine grappled with each other, with the West stepping in to provide support and resources to Ukraine, while Russia faced mounting pressure from various fronts. As the tide began to turn, it became evident that the situation was not as black and white as it first appeared. The power struggle was not just about military might, but also about psychological warfare, about perception, and about resilience. Ukraine's ability to hold its own against Russia's forces, to intercept missile attacks and to strike back, demonstrated a level of grit and determination that has shifted the narrative of this war. But amidst all this, we cannot forget the human cost. The lives lost, the homes destroyed, the families torn apart. The story of Sasha, the Ukrainian journalist who risked her life to report on the ground realities, is just one example of the countless other stories of bravery and sacrifice that have emerged from this conflict. The war in Ukraine is not just a political or military issue, it's a human issue, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. As the world watches, the hope is for a peaceful resolution that will end the suffering and bring stability to the region.